Well, hello. Welcome back to Soul Search Sunday with Johnny Tiger. Date is November 27, 2022. And yes, my voice is something a lot more dynamic. Yeah, I mean, I'm still coughing a little bit, and occasionally I still sound like I got a frog lodged in my throat, uh, like that. Uh, and uh, but it is getting better. So hopefully tomorrow I'll be able to do some fun stuff for Music Monday. Speaking of tomorrow, I'll have to get up super early to go help a friend translate at the courthouse. So I don't know, my energy level may not be super high by the time I get around to Music Monday tomorrow. Speaking of energy level, my energy level is actually a little bit low today because I spent the entire night tossing and turning. Not for any particular reason. It was just one of those nights when I just had a bout of insomnia and just lay there trying to will myself to sleep and couldn't sleep. And finally, by 5 in the morning, I started to get hungry, so I got up and snacked on something, and then finally, after that, I was able to fall asleep and then spend the rest of today feeling a little bit tired. Uh, but that's okay. It's Sunday. Didn't have anything planned. Anyway, so while I was laying there tossing and turning, I was thinking about audio cassette tapes. Yeah, I know. Really weird thing to be thinking about in the middle of the night, isn't it? I mean, unless you were born in the 80s and 90s or before that, I imagine you have no idea what these are. In front of the camera, well, that's assuming that I have the camera on the right setting anyway. You should be looking at a handful of cassette tapes. Now, what makes cassette tapes so special that I'm going to be talking about them during the Soul Search Sunday? Well, for the rest of you, I don't know. Maybe cassette tape never had that such import to you, especially if you were born after 2000. Then they probably don't mean anything other than old relics to you that you think that your aunts and uncles or parents talk about. But to me, audio cassette tapes come with so much memory that just laying there in bed thinking about them make me feel yes, I want to spend one episode just guiding you guys down memory lane and uh, share a little bit of my personal connection with audio cassette with you guys. If you were like me when you were born in the 70s, 80s, 90s, then I imagine this is going to trigger some fond memories as well. And some not so good memory. I mean, after all, if you grew up with cassette tape, I'm sure you're no stranger to taking your cassette tape out of the cassette player only to find that there's a little ribbon that has been pulled out of the tape and is now stuck to the machine. And most likely, the first thing out of your mouth right now, when that happens, is yeah, just imagine any kind of swear word that's going on here. And depending on how techy you are, how dexterous you are, this is when you carefully try to unwind the tape from the clutch, the death grip of your machine, trying not to damage the tape, and then spend the next 30 minutes carefully winding the tape back into the cassette, making sure that it's facing the right way so it's not going to play all gibberish and weird, only to find out after you've gone through all this, you put the cassette back into the machine, and yes, it's been damaged, and you must have done something wrong because now, rather than your favorite story or favorite song, all you hear is like I said, good old memory. Now, in case you don't already know that, I mean, you should. Uh, by now, there's a couple of things you should already know about Johnny Tiger. One, I collect action figures. I have a lot of action figures. Number two, I read a lot. That's why I always have something to talk about. Because I am a very voracious reader. Not so much so that I would fall into that bookworm category, because I do have a lot of other interests. I do a lot of other things, such as martial arts and making videos and spending time with my kitty cats and going out with friends and all that stuff. But a lot of time when I'm at home, uh, if I'm cooking, if I can be uh, reorganizing my collection, polishing a sword, sharpening a knife, something like that. I got my headset on my head and I'm reading. Now, don't confuse that with me being a super smart guy who, one of those guys who reads a lot and who knows a lot of things and uh, uh, like one of those super genius type. That's not me. Most of my readings are confined to things that are fun to read for me, and things that are fun for me are what I would call usually I call them junk food novels, fantasies and mysteries and horrors. I love horrors. I love my fantasy, swords and sorcery. So yeah, I'm not reading a lot to be smart. I'm reading a lot because I love reading. It's fun. This is a hobby that has been cultivated ever since I was very little, even younger than my memory would extend. Let me share with you one of my mom's favorite story. You know how sometimes when your mom, your dad get together with friends, with aunties and uncles, they share stories, and a lot of these stories are about you, things that you don't even remember, and things that are really, really embarrassing, and you don't even want to listen to them anymore because they are so embarrassing. Let me share one of these with you. When I was like 1 year old, 2 year old, a lot of time, uh, my mom, because my mom was looking after my father's business, so she was technically managing my dad's enterprises. So a lot of time, my mom had to be at the office or at the club or at a facility for a long period of time, uh, uh, 10, 15 hours a day. And back in the 80s, uh, you didn't have a lot of choices for childcare and stuff like that, especially in Taiwan. So for those first year or two, before my parents finally got it into their head that they should just hire me a full-time nanny to take care of me, my mom would try to take me to work with her. Now you can imagine that when you have to look after business and deal with staff members and all that stuff, she obviously couldn't devote all the time making sure that I was okay. So what my mom would do was she would set me up in one of the VIP rooms or one of the uh, offices. She would take two long sofas and she would put them together facing each other so they basically the sofa would form a bed, a really comfortable bed, and That was a little bit high, so I wouldn't be able to crawl out of it and hurt myself. Yeah, yeah, I wasn't a very athletic baby apparently. Uh, so my mom would put these two couches or sofas together, and then put me in them like a crib, and she would set up a tape player, a tape recorder, and she would put a cassette in there, and uh, she would pick the cassette that have fun children's stories or children's music, stuff like that. And because she picked the cassette, so she knew how long she had before the cassette would run out. So most of the time she knew she was good for an hour. For the hour that the cassette was playing, I would be pretty docile. I would be pretty calm. I wouldn't require a lot of looking after. So she would lock me in the office or in the VIP room with a uh, improvised crib and the cassette, and let that cassette just play from beginning to end while she would go and deal with business. Yeah, okay, I know, some of you are thinking this is horrifying. Like, that's a horrible mother. What if something happened to you? Hey, like I said, it was the 80s, it was in Taiwan. No, I was my mom's first and only baby, so it's not like she had a lot of experience. And honestly, had my mom has done a lot of great things, but being a good mother was never one of her strong suit. So hey, we acknowledge that. So off she went this one day. She went off. She had the cassette on to play, and about 30 minutes in, one of her staff member came to her and said, "Hey, I think your kid is screaming. We can't get into the room because you locked the room, but we hear some noise. I think you might want to go check out check on your kid." And so my mom went over and unlocked the room, and the first thing she noticed was, yes, I was crying and screaming and throwing a huge temper tantrum. And second, how come the cassette wasn't playing? She was perplexed because she knew that the cassette was good for 1 hour, and she knew she hadn't been away for 1 hour. So the cassette should still be going. I should be a very happy baby. I shouldn't be screaming and crying and throwing a temper tantrum. She said it wasn't until she got over to the crib and looked at the tape player, and apparently I, being a very curious baby, started pushing buttons on the tape player. And rather than play, the tape player was now on record. Curious, she rewound the tape and played the last 10 minutes. And this is the part she loved imitating for her friend. Because she said, rather than a children's story or children's music, whatever it was supposed to be on that tape, I got 10 minutes of, "Mom, where are you? Mommy, Mommy, help!" Something like that. So I imagine this was maybe a little bit when I was, now that I think of it, if I could articulate all those words, I was probably a little bit older than 1 year old. I don't know. I mean, my mom, the one that's telling the story. Like I said, I have no memory of it whatsoever. But she loved telling this story, and it's just embarrassing. Um, but anyway, this is probably the earliest example of my connection to audio cassette tape as a child. It was a way for my mom to keep me calm and under control. And unfortunately, like I said, my mother was never very good at being a good mother. In that, she wasn't very interested in learning about me or establishing an emotional bond with me or uh, taking care of me when I was sick or taking care of me when I was not a good child. Uh, she said we hired servants for that. So, for the most part, whenever my mother wanted to get in my good book, wanted to establish a good rapport with me when I was a child, she would either get me a toy, an action figure, or she would get me a new cassette tape. This started me down the road of being a good storyteller and a good, very, very voracious reader uh, from an early age. You guys may have no idea, but growing up as a blind child in a very big and hostile family in Taiwan in the 80s was very lonely. I didn't get to see my siblings a lot. I didn't get to go out with friends a lot. Uh, I wasn't even allowed to listen to popular music because my parents wanted me to be like Beethoven and Mozart, and they decided the best way for me to be like Beethoven and Mozart, those musicians, was for me to listen to nothing but classic music. So while I grew up in a very rich family, I also grew up under a lot of rules and oppression. And one of those things was I wasn't allowed to do a lot of things that other children were allowed to do. I wasn't allowed to go out, play outside, and get dirty, and learn how to climb trees, learn how to swim, stuff like that. So I spent a lot of time from being born and from all the way up until 9 years of age uh, on my own, playing alone, reading alone. Um, so my action figures, my robots, my animal toys were my best friends, and my cassette tapes were my best friends and teachers. I had a lot of cassette tapes when I was a child. I remember to this day, one day, just out of curiosity, me and one of my friends who were allowed to come and spend some time at the house, we decided to take all my cassettes out of the cabinet and just count them. We lined them up from one end of the room to the other end of the room, and we counted. And I still remember I had, and this was when I was 6 years old, over 1,300 cassette tapes. Literally covered the floor from end to end of that room. And I listened to every one of those cassettes multiple times. I memorized most of those stories and more. And still, every time I wanted a new story, I had to wait until my mom or someone to buy me a cassette tape. Now, I'm saying this in a very somber way because some of you may not even understand what that feels like. Okay, if you were sighted, you can walk into a store and or a library to pick up whatever books you like. You can see what titles there are. You can see what's available. You have the freedom to go in there and find whatever it is that you're looking for. Not me. As a blind child in Taiwan in the 80s, there was no accessibility to speak of. So unless someone were to give me a tape or to tell me about a new story or a new series or new whatever, I would have no idea what was available. And uh, I remember as a child, it was so aggravating. I was so mad many times when my mom would take me to the store and she would be wanting to look at clothes and and jewelries and stuff like that. And I would try to say, hey, I really would like some new stories. I've read I listened to my thousands of cassette multiple times. Like I'm sick and tired of the same old stories. Is there anything new? And my mom would be so impatient, and she'd say, no, 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 there's nothing new. There's nothing new. And I would feel so helpless as a child. I would feel so angry. I would feel like you're just saying that, like you are the one with working eyes and you are not even helping me. I am at your mercy. I need you to look for me, and you are just lying to me. This finally changed when I was 12 years old. Uh, Around that time, I believe it was 1992, when Taiwan finally opened its first library for the blind, and I was addicted to it. The idea that I could walk into a library that's full of cassette tapes, and they would have a catalog in Braille that I could read through over and over again, looking for titles I never heard of before, and listen to those cassette tapes. I thought I was in paradise. I spent hours and hours reading the catalog. Every month, when there's a new catalog, I would read it. I would look, hoping to find the cassette that I would be interested in. I would spend hours and hours in that library and just wandering between shelves, reading the braille labels, just feeling like I was that lucky boy in the candy shop that I could try anything I wanted. Finally, I didn't have to rely on a sighted person to find me new reading materials. Finally, I wasn't at the mercy of a sighted person. Finally, I didn't have to listen to them lie to me. No, there's nothing new. We already looked. Well, they didn't even look. I thought I was in paradise. Fast forward, 2022. Now I am sitting on two hard drives, about 8 TB, 8 terabytes worth of audiobooks on my computer. More audiobooks than I can ever read in my lifetime. Like, honestly, even if I read one book a day, I'll never get through these, for the rest of my lifetime. If I thought I was in paradise when I was 12 years old in that library for the blind in Taiwan, I had no idea what paradise really is. I am in paradise right now. Any book I want, I can either go Google it and buy it and download it, or even if I don't get any new book, I have so many books that will never run out of reading material. And every month there's more and more materials becoming available, and all I have to do is type in the name of the book or the author on YouTube or Google or Audible, and it's all mine. We like to think of a lot of the bad stuff that's going on around us right now: COVID, the war in Ukraine, the environmental disasters, all that stuff that's going on. We see crimes, poverty, uh, politicians that not doing their job. I get it because I feel that a lot of time. But this was the Thanksgiving weekend in the United States, and I guess what I want to say is there's a lot of things in my life right now that make me very, very thankful because I still remember the audio cassette tapes. I still remember what it was like to have to rely on other people to get me reading materials.